They said Alpha King Kaelan Blackwood was invincible. They said his empire, built on steel and blood, would last 1,000 years. But inside the high walls of the Obsidian estate, a secret was rotting the crown from the inside out. The king wasn't just sick, he was becoming a monster. The best doctors in the Western Territory had failed. The High Council was preparing his death shroud. No one could stop the feral madness consuming him, until a 22-year-old floor scrubber named Sienna Mercer, a girl rejected by her own family for being too weak, accidentally walked into the slaughterhouse that was his bedroom. What happened next didn't just save a life, it shattered the laws of their world. The air in the sterile wing of the Blackwood estate didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like iron, ozone, and the terrified sweat of powerful men. Dr. Aris Thorne wiped his forehead with a trembling hand, staring at the vitals monitor. Heart rate is 200 and climbing. The sedatives aren't working, Beta Stellan. If we give him any more, we'll stop his heart. Stellan, a man built like a tank with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, looked through the reinforced glass. Inside the containment room, the most powerful man on the continent was thrashing against titanium restraints. Kaelan Blackwood, the Alpha King. He didn't look like a king right now. He looked like a creature from a nightmare. His skin was burning with a fever that radiated heat through the glass. His eyes rolled back, showing only the whites, while his canines had extended, ripping into his own lip. "He isn't dying, Aris," Stellan growled, his voice low. "He's turning feral. The wolf is eating his mind." It was the curse of the bloodline. Too much power for one body. Without a true mate to anchor the soul, an alpha of Kaelan's magnitude eventually burned out. The wolf took over, destroying the man, leaving behind a mindless beast that would have to be put down. "We have an hour," Dr. Aris whispered. "Maybe less before he breaches those restraints." In the hallway outside, invisible to the high-ranking wolves discussing the fate of the kingdom, Sienna Mercer dipped a grey rag into a bucket of bleach water. She kept her head down. It was the first rule of survival for an Omega in the Blackwood pack, especially a packless one like her. Sienna was a stray, taken in out of pity 3 years ago, after her original mate, a cruel man named Liam, had publicly rejected her for being barren of a wolf spirit. She couldn't shift. She couldn't heal fast. She was, for all intents and purposes, human with a slightly better sense of smell. "Hey, you." "Cleaner?" A guard barked. Sienna flinched, gripping the mop handle. "Yes, sir." Dr. Aris dropped a tray of vials inside the airlock chamber. "Clean it up before the fumes get into the ventilation." "Now." "But the king?" Sienna asked, her voice barely a squeak. Everyone knew the king was in the containment unit. "He's behind the glass, you idiot. The spill is in the airlock. Just do your job." Sienna nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She dragged her bucket toward the heavy steel door. She swiped her access card, the lowest clearance level possible, and the outer door hissed open. She stepped into the small, sealed room between the hallway and the king's containment cell. Sure enough, shattered glass and blue liquid covered the floor. The smell was acrid. She dropped to her knees, scrubbing furiously, trying to ignore the terrifying sounds coming from the room beyond the inner glass door. Thump, thump, crack. Sienna froze. That wasn't the sound of a fist hitting a wall. That was the sound of metal shearing. She looked up. Through the observation window, she saw it happen in slow motion. King Kaelan, his torso slick with sweat and blood, roared. A sound that wasn't human. With a surge of impossible strength, he ripped the titanium cuff from the bed frame. The alarm screamed. Red lights began to strobe. Evacuate! He's loose! Seal the sector! Dr. Aris's voice boomed over the intercom. Sienna scrambled to get up, turning to the door she had entered through. It was locked. The emergency protocols had sealed the entire wing. "Open it!" she screamed, pounding on the heavy metal. "Please, I'm still in here!" But the guards outside were retreating. She was trapped in the airlock. Behind her, the inner glass door, the one separating her from the Alpha King, shuddered. Kalen had thrown himself against it. Spiderwebs of cracks appeared on the reinforced surface. Thump. "Please," Sienna sobbed, pressing her back against the locked exit. Crash. The safety glass exploded outward in a shower of diamonds. Sienna squeezed her eyes shut, curling into a ball on the floor, waiting for the death blow. The stories said a feral alpha killed anything that moved. He wouldn't see a girl. He would see a threat. She heard the heavy, wet slap of bare feet on the tiles. The growling was so deep it vibrated in her teeth. It sounded like a chainsaw idling. The growl moved closer. She could feel the heat radiating off him, like an open oven door. Sienna held her breath, tears leaking from her eyes. She felt a hand, large, rough, and scorching hot, grip her shoulder. This is it, she thought. At least it will be quick. She didn't scream. Instead, an instinct she didn't know she possessed took over. She didn't fight. She didn't beg. She simply turned her head, opened her tear-filled hazel eyes, and placed her small, cool hand over the hand that was gripping her to kill her. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling but strangely soft. "You're tired. Just sleep." It was a suicide move. You do not touch a feral alpha. But Kalen didn't rip her throat out. At the contact of her skin against his, a shock wave seemed to ripple through the room. The air pressure dropped. The growling stopped instantly. Kalen Blackwood, the man who could crush boulders with his bare hands, froze. His pupils, blown wide and black, contracted. The hazel of his irises returned, piercing through the madness. He looked down at the small woman, trembling beneath his grip. He took a jagged breath, inhaling her scent, lavender soap, bleach, and something underneath, something like vanilla and rain. "Mine," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. It wasn't a question. The king's knees buckled. He collapsed forward. Sienna gasped, bracing herself to be crushed by his weight. But he didn't fall on her. He fell into her. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his heavy breathing slowing down, sinking with hers. The red alarms continued to flash, bathing them in strobe light. On the other side of the security monitors, Stellan and Dr. Oris watched in stunned silence. "Did he just kill her?" the guard captain asked, hand on his weapon. Stellan squinted at the screen. He saw the king's hand, no longer a claw, resting possessively on the girl's waist. "No," Stellan whispered, a chill running down his spine. "He's purring." The transition from invisible cleaner to the most watched person in the kingdom happened in the span of 20 minutes. Sienna was not thanked. She was not praised. She was sedated. When she woke up, she wasn't in her cramped dormitory in the servants' quarters. She was in a room that cost more than her entire life's earnings. The ceiling was high, adorned with crown molding, and the sheets were silk. But the luxury couldn't hide the reality. There were bars on the window, and a guard was standing inside the door. She sat up, gasping, clutching her chest. The memory of the king's burning skin against hers was branded into her mind. "She's awake," the guard said into his earpiece. Moments later, the door opened. Beta Stellan walked in. In the hierarchy of the pack, Stellan was second only to the king. He was terrifying, a man who executed traitors without blinking. He dragged a chair over and sat backward on it, staring at Sienna with intense calculation. "Who sent you?" Stellan asked. His voice was calm, which made it scarier. "Well, what?" Sienna stammered, pulling the silk sheet up to her chin. "Who sent you to the king's room? Was it the Northern Pack? The Resistance?" "No one." Sienna's eyes widened. "I'm the cleaner, the guard, Rickard. He told me to clean the spill in the airlock. I got trapped." Stellan studied her pulse point. He was listening to her heart, checking for lies. He could hear the frantic rhythm of terror, but no deception. "You're Sienna Mercer," Stellan said, looking at a tablet. "Age 22, Omega, former mate of Liam Vance, rejected 3 years ago due to latent wolf genetics. You have no wolf." "I know what I am," Sienna whispered, looking down. The shame of being wolfless was an old wound. "Then explain to me." Stellan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "How a wolfless Omega walked into a room with a feral alpha, a state where he should have torn you into confetti and put him to sleep in 10 seconds. I don't know. I just touched him." "You touched him," Stellan repeated flatly. "Do you know what he did after you passed out from the stress?" Sienna shook her head. "He wouldn't let go of you. It took 4 of us to pry his fingers off your jacket. We had to cut the jacket off just to get you out of the room. He's currently sedated again, but his vitals have stabilized for the first time in 6 months. Stellan stood up and paced the room. "The council is in an uproar. Half of them think you're a witch who cast a spell on him. The other half think you're an assassin who poisoned him with a tranquilizer." "I saved him," Sienna cried out, finding a spark of courage. "He was hurting. I could feel it. It was like loud static in my head, and when I touched him, the static stopped." Stellan stopped pacing. He looked at her with a strange expression. "You felt his pain?" Before she could answer, the door swung open again. This time, it wasn't a guard. It was a woman. Tall, striking, with platinum blonde hair and eyes like ice. Lady Vanessa was the daughter of the High Elder, and everyone knew she had been campaigning to be Kaelin's queen for years. She walked in, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She looked at Sienna like one might look at a roach on a wedding cake. "So this is the creature," Vanessa sneered. "She looks like a stiff breeze would snap her in half." "Vanessa, not now," Stellan warned. "The king is asking for her." Vanessa spat the words out like they tasted vile. "He woke up 10 minutes ago. He is tearing the medical wing apart again. He says he needs the quiet one." Sienna felt a strange flutter in her stomach at those words. The quiet one. "He's delusional," Vanessa continued, stepping closer to the bed. She leaned down, her perfume overpowering and cloying. "Listen to me, little scrub. You got lucky. But if you think for 1 second that the Alpha King has any genuine interest in a broken, rejected Omega, you are delusional too. You are a medical curiosity. Nothing more." "Vanessa!" Stellan barked. "Enough! The king gave an order." Stellan turned to Sienna. "Get up. If you really can keep him calm, we need you down there. If he goes fully feral, we have to execute him. You are the only thing standing between Kaelin and a silver bullet." Sienna scrambled out of bed. She was still wearing her grey scrubbing uniform, now stained and wrinkled. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Messy brown hair, pale skin, large, frightened eyes. She looked nothing like a queen. She looked like a victim. "Move," the guard urged. They marched her through the corridors. The estate was in lockdown. Soldiers in tactical gear lined the hallways. As they approached the medical wing, the air grew heavy again. The pressure. Sienna felt it before she heard it. A magnetic pull, tugging at her navel, dragging her toward the double doors at the end of the hall. Inside the room, the scene was chaotic. Equipment was overturned. Doctors were cowering in the corner. In the center of the room, Kalen Blackwood stood. He was no longer strapped to the bed. He was wearing loose sweatpants, his chest bare and heaving. The scars of 100 battles mapped his skin. He looked exhausted, wild and lethal. His eyes were darting around the room, frantic. "Where is she?" he roared, his voice cracking. "You took her away." "Sire, please," Dr. Aris pleaded. Kalen spun around, snarling. Then the door opened. Stellan pushed Sienna into the room. The moment Kalen saw her, the tension snapped. The wild panic vanished from his face, replaced by an intensity that made Sienna's knees weak. He didn't rush this time. He stalked toward her, a predator approaching a prize. The guards raised their tranquilizer guns. "Stand down!" Kalen ordered, never taking his eyes off Sienna. He stopped inches from her. He towered over her, radiating heat. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, trembling slightly. "You're real," he whispered. "I thought I hallucinated you." Sienna looked up, unable to break his gaze. "I'm real, Your Majesty." "Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice laced with a vulnerability that shocked everyone in the room. "They took me," she answered honestly. Kalen's eyes flashed with anger. He looked over Sienna's shoulder at Stellan and Vanessa, a low growl building in his chest. "If anyone touches her again," he announced to the room, his voice echoing with alpha command, "I will rip their arm off." He looked back at Sienna, his expression softening. He stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. He lowered his head, burying his nose in her hair, inhaling deeply. "The pain stops when you're here," he murmured against her ear. "Don't leave." I have to work, sire. The floors." Kalen pulled back, looking at her with confusion, then saw her uniform. He frowned, his thumb brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "You don't scrub floors anymore, Sienna," he said, and the finality in his tone sent a shockwave through the gathered court. "You stay where I can see you. You stay in my room." Vanessa gasped from the doorway. "Kalen, you cannot be serious. She is a servant. She is an Omega." Kalen didn't even look at Vanessa. He wrapped an arm around Sienna's waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. The bond slammed into Sienna then, undeniable, overwhelming, and terrifying. "She is the only thing that keeps the wolf from eating me alive," Kalen growled. "She sleeps in my bed. Tonight." It was 3 a.m. when Sienna woke up. She wasn't in her servant's cot. She was in a bed the size of a small island, buried under duvet covers that smelled of sandalwood and male musk. For a moment, panic seized her. Then she felt the weight. King Kalen was asleep next to her. His massive arm was draped over her stomach, pinning her to the mattress. His face was buried in the pillow right next to her neck. For the first time in months, according to the staff, the Alpha King was sleeping without sedatives. Sienna lay perfectly still. She studied his face in the moonlight, filtering through the bulletproof windows. Asleep, he didn't look like the monster the tabloids described. He looked young, tired, and achingly handsome. The harsh lines of pain around his mouth had smoothed out. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. Not fear, but a deep, resonant hum. It was the same feeling she'd had in the containment cell. The static was gone. She tried to wiggle free to use the bathroom. "Don't," Kalen grumbled, his voice thick with sleep. He tightened his grip, pulling her back against his chest. "Stay." I need water, Your Majesty," Sienna whispered. Kalen opened one eye. It was hazel, clear and focused. "There is water on the nightstand." He reached out, grabbed a crystal carafe, poured a glass, and handed it to her, all without letting her leave the bed. "Drink," he ordered. Sienna drank, her hands shaking slightly. "Sire, I can't stay here forever. The staff, Lady Vanessa, they will talk." Kalen sat up, the sheet falling to his waist. His torso was a tapestry of scars, but the feral fever that had turned his skin red yesterday was gone. "Let them talk," Kalen said, his voice hardening. "Do you know what happens when you leave the room, Sienna?" She shook her head. "The noise comes back. It starts as a whisper, then it screams. It's like 1,000 wolves howling in my skull. When you are near, it's silence. You are not a guest, Sienna. You are my medicine." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Why did Liam reject you?" The question was sudden and sharp. Sienna flinched. "Because I am broken," she said quietly, looking at her hands. "I turned 18, and my wolf never came. I can't shift. I can't run. In a world of predators, I'm just prey. Liam needed a strong mate to help him run his security firm. I was a liability." Kalen reached out and tilted her chin up. "You walked into a room with a feral alpha and brought him to his knees without throwing a punch. That is not weakness, Sienna. That is power. I just need to figure out what kind." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Enter!" Kalen barked, the softness vanishing instantly. Beta Stellan entered, looking exhausted. He held a tablet. "Sire, the council is convening at breakfast. They know about the girl. They are demanding you present her. And Liam Cross is here." Sienna's blood ran cold. "Liam, why is he here?" "He heard the rumors," Stellan said, his eyes sympathetic. "He claims that since he never formally annulled the mating contract, only verbally rejected you, he still has legal claim over you. He says the king is holding his mate hostage." Kalen let out a low, menacing laugh that vibrated the bed frame. He stood up, naked and unashamed, stalking toward the wardrobe to grab a robe. "He wants to claim her now?" Kalen asked, tying the sash. "Now that she is the favorite of the king? Now that she is valuable?" "He says he wants to reconcile," Stellan said. "He wants a payday," Kalen corrected. He turned to Sienna. "Get dressed. Not in your uniform. Stellan, get the stylists in here. Dress her like a queen." "Sire, no," Sienna pleaded, terrified. "I can't face him, and the council. They'll eat me alive." Kalen walked back to the bed. He leaned down, placing his hands on either side of her hips, trapping her. "Let them try," he whispered, a dangerous light in his eyes. "You belong to the crown now, Sienna, and I am a very possessive king." The grand hall of the Obsidian estate was designed to intimidate. High stone arches, banners of black and gold, and a table that seated 50 of the most dangerous werewolves in the Western Territory. Sienna felt like she was walking to the gallows. She was wearing a dress she could never have afforded in 100 lifetimes. A deep emerald silk gown that clung to her curves, with a back that plunged dangerously low. Her hair was swept up, exposing her neck. She felt exposed. Kalen walked beside her, his hand firmly on the small of her back. His touch was the only thing keeping her upright. He was wearing a formal black suit, looking every bit the king. But Sienna could feel the tension in his muscles. The noise was trying to come back. She squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, grounding himself. As they entered the hall, the conversation died instantly. 50 pairs of eyes locked onto them. At the far end sat the High Council, 5 elderly wolves with eyes like flint. To the right sat Lady Vanessa, looking beautiful and murderous in red. And there, standing near the buffet, was Liam Cross. He looked the same as he did 3 years ago, handsome, blonde, and arrogant. When he saw Sienna, his eyes widened, raking over her dress. He didn't look at her like a person. He looked at her like a car he had sold too cheap. "Your Majesty," Liam said, bowing low as they approached. "And, Sienna, you look well." Kalen ignored him, pulling out a chair for Sienna at the head of the table to his right. This was the Queen's seat. A collective gasp went through the room. "Sit," Kaelin commanded the room. The dinner was an exercise in torture. The council members grilled Kaelin about his health, their eyes constantly flicking to Sienna with suspicion. "Is it true, King Kaelin," Elder Thomas asked, cutting his steak, "that you rely on this servant to maintain your sanity?" "Sienna is my personal aide," Kaelin said smoothly. "Her presence is beneficial." "Beneficial?" Lady Vanessa chimed in, swirling her wine. "It's embarrassing. The Alpha King, babysat by a wolfless reject. It makes the pack look weak, Kaelin. The Northern Territory is already laughing at us." "Let them laugh," Kaelin said, his voice dropping an octave. "If they cross the border, I will remind them why I am king." "But surely," Liam spoke up, stepping forward from the lower tables, "if the king needs a mate to stabilize him, he should choose a high-born female. Sienna, well, we all know her history. She is defective." Kaelin's fork bent in half in his hand. "Careful, Cross," Kaelin warned. "I only speak the truth, sire." Liam smiled, a oily, confident smile. "I rejected her for a reason. She is barren of spirit. She is empty. In fact, I am doing you a favor by offering to take her back. I can take this burden off your hands." Sienna stared at her plate, tears stinging her eyes. Defective. Empty. The words cut deeper than any knife. "She is not a burden," Kaelin snarled, the air around him beginning to shimmer with heat. "She is the only real thing in this room." A servant appeared, placing a fresh goblet of wine in front of Kaelin. "Compliments of Elder Thomas, sire. A vintage 1945. Kaelin reached for the glass, his eyes still locked on Liam with murderous intent. He was losing control. The wolf was surfacing. Sienna smelled it then. Amidst the roast beef, the expensive perfume, and the burning candle wax, a sharp, metallic scent hit her nose. It smelled like bitter almonds and copper. It was coming from the wine. Kaelin lifted the glass to his lips. "No!" Sienna screamed. She didn't think. She lunged across the armrest, slapping the heavy crystal goblet out of his hand. The glass shattered against the stone floor. The dark red liquid hissed as it touched the stone, bubbling and eating into the rock like acid. Silence descended on the room. Absolute, terrified silence. Elder Thomas stood up, his face pale. She is mad. She attacked the king." "Look at the floor," Sienna yelled, pointing at the bubbling stone. "It's poison! Wolfsbane mixed with silver nitrate." Kaelin looked at the smoking stain on the floor, then at the empty hand where the glass had been. If he had drunk that in his weakened state, it would have killed his wolf instantly, leaving him a hollow shell. Or worse, it would have driven him into a permanent, lethal frenzy. He slowly stood up. The power radiating off him shattered the windows at the end of the hall. "Who poured this?" Kaelin's voice wasn't human. It was the voice of the beast. The servant who had brought the wine tried to run. Kaelin moved faster than the eye could follow. He crossed the room in a blur, pinning the man to the wall by his throat. "Who?" Kaelin roared. "I don't know," the servant choked. "I was just told to bring it." Kaelin dropped him and turned to the room. His eyes were glowing red. He was slipping. The betrayal, the anger, it was too much. He looked at the council, at Vanessa, at Liam. He looked like he was about to slaughter them all. "Kaelin!" Sienna cried out. She ran to him. The guards raised their weapons, unsure if she was a threat. "Stop!" Stellan ordered the guards. Sienna threw her arms around Kaelin's waist from behind, pressing her face against his spine. "Kaelin, breathe! I'm here! I'm right here! The static is gone. Listen to me." The room watched in awe. The monster, who was seconds away from a massacre, froze. He placed his large hands over hers on his stomach. He took a shuddering breath. The red faded from his eyes, returning to Hazel. He turned around in her arms, ignoring the 50 witnesses, ignoring the assassination attempt. He cupped her face. "You smelled it," he whispered, bewildered. "Even I didn't smell it." "It smelled like copper," she whispered. Kalen looked up, his gaze sweeping over the terrified room. He pulled Sienna to his side, his arm like an iron band around her. "This is the second time this woman has saved the crown," Kalen announced, his voice cold and absolute. "Anyone who calls her defective again dies. Anyone who looks at her wrong dies." He locked eyes with Liam Cross. "And as for her previous mating, consider it annulled by royal decree. Sienna is under my protection. She is not a servant. She is not a guest." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "She is the king's anchor, and if I find out who poisoned that wine, I will burn their house to the ground." Kalen swept Sienna into his arms, carrying her bridal style out of the hall, leaving the council and the court in a stunned, fearful silence. As they exited, Sienna looked over Kalen's shoulder. She saw Lady Vanessa. The woman wasn't scared. She was smiling, a small, tight, knowing smile. And in her hand, hidden under the table, she was holding a small vial. The medical wing was locked down. Only 3 people were allowed inside: King Kalen, Beta Stellan, and Dr. Oris. Sienna sat on the exam table, her legs dangling, still wearing the emerald dress from the disastrous dinner. She felt small. Kalen stood by the door, arms crossed, staring at the doctors with a look that dared them to make a mistake. "Well?" Kalen demanded. "How did she smell the poison? It was odorless to me. It was odorless to everyone." Dr. Aris pulled a slide from a microscope. He looked pale, like he had seen a ghost. "Sire, we've been treating Miss Mercer under the assumption that she is wolfless, a genetic dead end. That's why her former mate rejected her. That's why she was cast out." "Get to the point," Kalen growled. "She isn't wolfless," Aris whispered. "She is a null." The room went silent. "That's a myth," Stellan said, stepping forward. "Nulls went extinct 300 years ago." "Her blood doesn't carry a wolf spirit," Aris explained, pointing to the screen. "It carries an antibody to magic. That's why she can't shift. Her body rejects the transformation. But that's also why she can calm the king. Her touch doesn't just soothe him. It literally neutralizes the excess magical energy killing him. She is a living, grounding wire." Kalen looked at Sienna with a mixture of awe and terror. "So, she is immune to the madness?" "She is the cure to the madness," Aris corrected, "and that makes her the most valuable creature on this continent. If the enemies of the crown find out what she is, they won't just kill her. They will harvest her." Sienna shivered. "Harvest me?" Kalen was at her side in an instant, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders. "No one is touching you. We are going to the safe house in the mountains. Tonight. Stellan, prep the convoy." But they were already too late. While the king was planning an escape, Lady Vanessa was executing a coup. In the security room of the estate, the head of guards, a man named Gannon who had massive gambling debts, watched the screens. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Do it now. The debt is cleared." Gannon typed a code into the console. System reboot initiated. For exactly 60 seconds, the cameras, the motion sensors, and the biometric locks in the East Wing went dead. Sienna was in the bathroom of the medical suite, washing her face, trying to scrub away the fear. Kalen was just outside the door, discussing the route with Stellan. The ventilation grate above the sink unscrewed silently. Two figures dropped down. They were dressed in black tactical gear, wearing gas masks. Before Sienna could scream, a heavy gloved hand clamped over her mouth. A needle hissed into her neck. The world tilted sideways. The last thing she saw was a pair of familiar, cruel blue eyes behind a mask. Liam. He smirked, stroking her hair as she went limp. "I told you, babe. I always get my property back." By the time Kaelin kicked open the bathroom door 3 minutes later, the room was empty. The vent was open, and on the mirror, written in red lipstick, was a message. "Come alone to Black Pine Ridge, or she bleeds." The roar that tore from Kaelin's throat shattered every window in the medical wing. It wasn't the roar of a king. It was the sound of a nuclear bomb going off. Black Pine Ridge was a desolate stretch of forest 20 miles north of the estate. It was currently buried under 3 feet of snow. A black SUV sat idling in a clearing. Inside, Sienna was zip-tied to the door handle. She was groggy, her head pounding from the sedative. Liam sat in the driver's seat, tapping the steering wheel nervously. "He's coming. I can feel it." Outside, Lady Vanessa stood in a heavy fur coat, flanked by 6 mercenaries, armed with military-grade wolfsbane rounds. "Let him come," Vanessa said, checking her pistol. "He's unstable. Without his little pet to calm him, the stress of the chase will force him into the feral state. He'll be a mindless beast. We'll put him down like a rabid dog, and the council will thank me for saving the kingdom." "And Sienna?" Liam asked, looking at his ex-mate. "Do whatever you want with her." Vanessa waved a hand dismissively. "Once Kaelin is dead, she's useless to me." Sienna blinked, her vision clearing. She saw the mercenaries spreading out into the trees. They were setting a trap. "Liam," Sienna rasped, her throat dry. "Don't do this. She's using you." Liam turned, his face twisted with jealousy. "Shut up. You think you're special now? Because you slept in his bed? You're nothing, Sienna. You're a defect. I'm the only one who would ever take you back." "He loves me," Sienna whispered. She didn't know if it was true, but she felt it. She felt the pull in her chest. "He loves that you're a tranquilizer," Liam shouted, slamming his hand on the dashboard. Suddenly, the radio in the car shrieked with static. The lights on the dashboard flickered and died. Outside, the wind stopped. The birds stopped singing. "He's here!" one of the mercenaries yelled into his comms. "I don't see anything!" another shouted. Crunch! The sound was wet and heavy. A mercenary standing near the tree line simply vanished. He was there 1 second, and then he was pulled upward into the darkness of the pine canopy. "Contact! Contact!" Gunfire erupted. Bright flashes lit up the snowy forest. Vanessa screamed orders. "Target the vitals! Aim for the head!" But they weren't fighting a man. From the shadows, a creature emerged. It was a wolf, but it was the size of a horse. Its fur was black as void, absorbing the light. Its eyes were burning red. It was King Kaelin, fully shifted, fully feral. He moved like a blur of shadow. He didn't just bite, he obliterated. He swiped a massive paw, and a mercenary flew 50 feet, crashing into a tree with bone-shattering force. "Shoot him!" Vanessa shrieked, retreating toward the car. Bullets slammed into the giant wolf's flank. He didn't even flinch. The pain only fueled the rage. He was a machine of death, tearing through the squad Vanessa had paid a fortune for. Liam panicked. He fumbled with the keys, trying to start the car. "Come on, come on!" The engine sputtered. The giant black wolf turned its head. It locked eyes with Liam through the windshield. Sienna saw the wolf's eyes. There was no humanity left in them, just pure, unadulterated murder. He was going to tear the car apart to get to Liam, and he wouldn't care if Sienna was in the way. He didn't recognize her. He was gone. "He's going to kill us both," Liam screamed, scrambling for his gun. The wolf charged. The ground shook with every stride. "Kalen, no!" Sienna screamed, struggling against the zip ties. The wolf leaped, landing on the hood of the car, crushing the metal like tin foil. The windshield shattered, raining glass onto them. Liam fired 3 shots point-blank into the wolf's chest. The wolf snarled, a sound that ruptured Liam's eardrums, and bit the roof of the car, ripping the metal sheet off as if opening a can of sardines. He lunged for Liam, his jaws snapping inches from his face. "Sienna, do something!" Liam shrieked, cowering behind her. "Control your beast!" Sienna managed to snap one of the zip ties. Her wrist was bleeding, but she didn't care. She threw herself across the center console, putting her body between the feral king and Liam. "Kalen!" she cried out, reaching up. The giant wolf froze. His muzzle was dripping with blood. Not his own. He looked down at the small woman blocking his path. His hackles were raised, his breath coming in hot, foggy bursts that smelled of copper. He growled, a low, vibrating threat. "Move," the growl said. "It's me," Sienna wept, reaching her hand out toward his massive snout. "It's Sienna. Look at me." Vanessa, hiding behind a tree, saw her chance. The beast was distracted. She raised her high-powered rifle, aiming for the spot just behind the wolf's ear. The kill spot. "Goodbye, Your Majesty," she whispered. Sienna's peripheral vision caught the glint of the scope. She didn't think. Instinct took over, the instinct of a mate protecting her alpha. As Vanessa pulled the trigger, Sienna threw herself upward, wrapping her arms around the wolf's neck, trying to pull him down. Bang! The shot echoed through the valley. The wolf didn't fall. Sienna gasped, her grip on his fur tightening. A bloom of red began to spread across the back of her white dress. The bullet meant for the king's brain had struck Sienna in the shoulder. The giant wolf roared, a sound of such agony and despair that it shook the snow from the trees. The red in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a terrified hazel. He began to shrink, bones cracking and reshaping, shifting back into human form. Seconds later, Kalen was human again, naked in the snow, catching Sienna as she slid off the hood of the ruined car. "No, no, no," Kalen begged, pressing his hands over the wound. "Sienna, look at me. Stay with me." Did I save you?" she whispered, her skin turning grey. "You saved me," Kalen sobbed, tears cutting tracks through the blood on his face. "You stupid, brave girl. You saved me." He looked up. Liam was scrambling out of the car, trying to run. Vanessa was reloading. Kalen didn't scream. He didn't roar. He looked at Vanessa with a coldness that was far more terrifying than his wolf form. "Beta Stellan," Kalen said into the comms unit he had ripped from a dead mercenary's vest. "I am at Black Pine Ridge. Bring the medical evac." He looked at Vanessa, who was now frozen in terror. "And bring the torturers," Kalen added softly. "I want them alive, both of them, for a very, very long time." Sienna's eyes rolled back. Her hand went limp in his. "Sienna!" The king screamed her name into the winter sky, but the only answer was the wind. For 72 hours the Obsidian estate was a tomb. The usual hum of activity, the clatter of guard patrols, the ringing of phones, the murmurs of the court, had been silenced by a single, terrifying order from the Alpha King. Absolute quiet. In the Royal Medical Suite, the air smelled of antiseptic and ozone. Kalen Blackwood sat in a high-backed leather chair that he had dragged to the bedside. He hadn't showered. He hadn't eaten. The dried blood on his dress shirt, her blood, had turned a rusty brown, stiffening the fabric. But he refused to change. To take it off felt like admitting that the moment she took a bullet for him was a fever dream, and he needed the visceral reminder that it was real. He stared at the monitor, tracking her heartbeat. Beep, beep, beep. It was the only sound tethering him to sanity. Dr. Orris stepped into the room, his footsteps soundless on the plush carpet. He looked at the king, seeing a man who was physically present but spiritually hovering somewhere between grief and madness. "Sire," Aris whispered, "her vitals have been stable for 12 hours. The wound was clean. The silver nitrate in the bullet was neutralized before it could enter her bloodstream. She is just sleeping." "She's too still," Kalen rasped. His voice sounded like it had been dragged over broken glass. "She took a bullet for a monster, Aris. Who does that? In the history of our kind, who throws themselves in front of a feral beast?" "A true mate," Aris replied softly. "Not one of biology, perhaps, but one of soul. She didn't see the monster, Kalen. She saw you." Kalen looked down at Sienna's hand, engulfed in his own. Her skin was pale, almost translucent against the white sheets. He traced the blue vein in her wrist with his thumb. "I promised to protect her," he murmured, a tear finally escaping, cutting a clean track through the grime on his cheek. "And I let her bleed." As if hearing his despair, the fingers in his hand twitched. Kalen froze. He stopped breathing. Sienna's head shifted on the pillow. Her lashes, dark against her pale cheeks, fluttered. She let out a soft, pained groan. "Sienna?" Kalen was on his feet, leaning over her, his hands hovering, afraid to touch her and cause pain. Her eyes opened. They were hazy at first, struggling to focus in the dim light. Then the hazel irises locked onto his face. Clarity returned. "You," she whispered, her voice rough, barely a sound. "You look terrible." Kalen let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He collapsed back into the chair, burying his face in the mattress beside her hip. "I've been told." Sienna moved her hand, wincing slightly as she threaded her fingers through his messy hair. "The wolf. Did he hurt anyone else?" "No," Kalen said, lifting his head. His eyes were fierce, burning with an intensity that made the air crackle. "You brought him back. You saved everyone. You saved me." "Did we win?" she asked, her eyes closing again as exhaustion pulled at her. Kalen's expression shifted. The grieving lover vanished, replaced by the ruthless king of the West. A cold, hard edge returned to his jawline. "We won," he vowed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And now, the debts must be paid." 3 days later, the great plaza of the capital was a sea of black and grey. 10,000 wolves had gathered, standing shoulder to shoulder. The atmosphere wasn't festive. It was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. They were waiting for the king. On the high balcony of the estate, double doors swung open. Kalen stepped out. He was impeccable now, dressed in a black military uniform with gold piping, a heavy ceremonial cape billowing in the biting wind. But the crowd didn't look at him. They looked at the wheelchair he was pushing. Sienna sat wrapped in a thick wool blanket, her face pale but determined. When the crowd saw her, the wolfless girl who had tamed the beast, a ripple of murmurs went through the plaza. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was awe. Kalen walked to the railing. Below him, in the center of the square, a wooden platform had been erected. 2 figures knelt there, bound in heavy suppression chains that glowed with a faint blue light, neutralizing their strength. Liam Cross and Lady Vanessa. They were unrecognizable. Their fine clothes were in tatters. Liam, once the arrogant golden boy, was shaking uncontrollably, his head bowed. Vanessa, the Ice Queen, looked haggard, her eyes darting around the silent, hostile crowd, looking for an ally she would never find. Kalen's voice boomed over the speakers, echoing off the skyscrapers. "Citizens of the West!" The silence was instant. For generations, you were taught that strength was the only virtue. Kaelin began, his voice steel. You were taught that those without a wolf spirit were nothing. Nulls, rejects, waste. He placed a hand on Sienna's shoulder. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. Because of that lie, I almost destroyed this kingdom. This woman, he gestured to Sienna, was cast out by her own pack. She was mocked by this council. And yet, when the Alpha King was a feral monster, she was the only one brave enough to touch him. When a bullet was fired to assassinate your king, she didn't run. She took it. Shame rippled through the crowd, heads bowed. The silence grew heavier. Kaelin looked down at the prisoners. "Liam Cross," Kaelin said. The name was a curse. Liam looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Mercy, sire, please! I only wanted to help. I was confused." "You rejected her because she couldn't give you power," Kaelin said, his voice void of emotion. "You treated a mate, the most sacred bond given by the moon, as a business transaction. You failed the most basic test of a wolf, loyalty." "And you, Vanessa," Kaelin turned his gaze to the woman who had tried to kill him. "You sought to rule a kingdom of ashes. You poisoned the wine. You hired mercenaries to hunt us down like animals." Vanessa spat on the floor of the platform. "I did what was necessary. A wolfless queen is an abomination. A queen who bleeds for her people is no abomination," Kaelin roared, the sound vibrating in the chests of everyone present. "She is a savior." He raised his hand. The executioners stepped forward. "I strip you both of your rank," Kaelin pronounced. "I strip you of your names. You are hereby exiled to the grey wastes beyond the northern wall." A gasp went through the crowd. The grey wastes were a frozen hellscape, populated by rogue wolves and devoid of food. It was a death sentence, but a slow, agonizing one. "You will leave this city with nothing but the clothes on your backs," Kaelin continued. "If you survive the cold, the madness, and the hunger, then perhaps the moon has forgiven you. But if I ever see your faces in my lands again, I will not be as kind as nature." "No!" Liam screamed as the guards hauled him up. "Kaelin, please, just kill me. Don't send me there." Kaelin didn't even blink. He turned his back on them as they were dragged away, their screams fading into the roar of the transport trucks. He looked down at Sienna. "Was that enough?" he asked quietly, the microphone off. Sienna watched the trucks disappear. She felt the weight of the moment, the closing of a chapter that had defined her entire life. She looked up at the man who had destroyed the world for her. "It's over," she whispered. "Let them go." 1 month later, the obsidian hall had been transformed. The stark, intimidating black stone was softened by thousands of white roses. The scent of vanilla and rain, Sienna's scent, filled the air, mingling with the expensive perfumes of the nobility. Sienna stood at the entrance of the long aisle. She wasn't wearing a servant's uniform. She wasn't wearing hospital scrubs. She was wearing a gown of crushed velvet and white lace, the back cut low to reveal the faint, pink scar on her shoulder. She wore it not as a blemish, but as a badge of honor. As she walked down the aisle, the limp from her injury was barely noticeable, masked by a grace that stunned the court. The High Council members who had once sneered at her bowed low as she passed. Beta Stellan stood at the front, grinning like a proud older brother. She reached the altar where Kaelin waited. He looked breathless. The feral madness was gone, the dark circles under his eyes replaced by a vibrancy that radiated power. But it was a controlled power, anchored by the woman walking toward him. The High Elder, a man of 80 years, held up the crown of the moon, a delicate circlet of woven silver that had never been worn by a wolfless woman in the history of the pack. "Sienna Mercer," the elder announced, his hands trembling slightly. "Do you accept the burden of this line? Do you vow to be the peace to the king's war?" Sienna looked at Kaelin. She saw the love in his eyes, a love that was terrifying and beautiful. "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And do you, King Kaelin," the elder turned to him, "vow to protect her with your life? To lead her?" Kaelin took Sienna's hands in his. He broke protocol, stepping closer, invading her space until they were breathing the same air. "I vow to serve her," Kaelin corrected, his voice ringing out, shocking the traditionalists in the room. "I am the sword. She is the hand that guides it. Without her, I am nothing but a beast. With her, I am a king." He slowly went down on one knee. The Alpha King, the apex predator of the West, knelt before the former floor scrubber. The hall erupted in a collective gasp, followed by deafening silence. The elder lowered the silver crown onto Sienna's dark hair. "Then rise," the elder proclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. "Sienna of House Blackwood, Queen of the West, the Alpha's anchor." Sienna reached down and pulled Kaelin to his feet. He didn't wait for the applause. He grabbed her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste, ceremonial kiss. It was deep, possessive, and searing, a kiss that told the entire world exactly who she belonged to, and who belonged to her. The static in the air was gone. The noise in Kaelin's head was gone. There was only her. Sienna pulled back slightly, breathless, her forehead resting against his. The crowd was cheering now, a roar of approval that shook the stained glass windows. "So," she whispered, a playful smile touching her lips. "What does the king want to do now that he has his queen?" Kaelin grinned, his eyes twinkling with a mischief she hadn't seen before. "I believe Dr. Aris prescribed strict bed rest," he murmured for her ears only. "And as your king, I intend to personally ensure you stay in bed for a very, very long time." Sienna laughed, the sound light and free. The servant girl was gone. The rejected mate was a memory. The queen had risen. And for the first time in history, the Blackwood pack didn't just have a ruler. They had a heart. And that, my friends, is how a rejected null brought the most powerful Alpha King to his knees. From cleaning up toxic spills to wearing the crown of the moon, Sienna's journey proves that true power isn't about claws or fangs. It's about the strength of your spirit. I have to ask you guys, do you think Liam and Vanessa got what they deserved? Was exile to the grey wastes enough? Or should Kaelin have finished them off? I feel like leaving them to the elements was almost crueler than death. Let me know your verdict in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. I'll see you in the next video with another intense romance drama. Until then, stay wild.